Hello, everybody. Catchy13 with Catchy Gaming. And Monster Hunter Wilds came out technically Thursday for me, but it's so late at night that I only squeezed in a few hours since I didn't have anything to do on Friday. And I said, what the heck? And I ended up playing a little bit with my brother, just a little bit. Then he was also required to take a day off, so we spent all day playing Monster Hunter yesterday, and I'm 18 hours in. Yeah, yesterday was a completely and totally unproductive day when I needed to work on my car. When I got the parts in late in the day, and I could have started, but yeah, I admit I put it off. And anyways, one of the things I noticed, I just out of curiosity pulled up what people thought of this game, and I saw that it was getting mixed reviews, and I was looking at some of these reviews. Most of them are related to technical issues, saying that the game is a bit of a slog and poorly optimized. And I had to kind of question some of these. I'm wondering how old the rigs they're using are to get such performance. Mine is approaching like 7, maybe 8 years at this point, and I have to get a new one, not because it's long in the tooth. Well, I mean, it's getting there, but because of the whole entire Windows 11 thing, and my processor can't do the whole security thing that Windows 11 requires on top of my motherboard having the best processor I can have, so that's a whole different story. Anyways, it runs over 60 frames per second with a 3060 graphics card. Maybe it's a 3080. I don't remember anymore. I could look, but I think it's just superfluous at this point, considering there are far better graphic cards out there. And so I was just digging into it just a little bit for the briefest of moments, and it seems to me a lot of the issues come from the high-res textures. I haven't tried running it on that, and I suspect, yes, it'll drop my frames and some of the performance I have with the game. On top of that, I'm also guessing some people didn't read the requirements that it requires an SSD. I'm pretty sure that's an issue for some people as well. But for the most part, I don't have an issue. I've had some connection issues with the game, and that could very easily be my internet, not necessarily Capcom servers and all that other fun stuff. And I've had one area of the game where the screen flickers like mad, and I dare not show it because I think it might simulate a flash and cause somebody out there to have a seizure, because the flicker is more or less a black shape, something in the geography or some texture just not working correct in one very specific part of a very small section of map, and it's very white in that section of the map, so I don't want to show it. But outside of those technical issues, I haven't seen what people have been describing, like enemies, or I should say monsters popping in. I haven't experienced that. They're either just always there, or they come in and leave by their usual means of flying in or whatever tunnel they come out of. So, as far as the game goes, I'm actually really, really enjoying it, obviously, because I played it for 18 hours versus Avowed, where it took me like 5 days to get 14 hours in, or maybe it's 3, I don't remember. I was bored out of my mind with that game. But what do I think of it so far? So I played the beta, open beta, twice, and I played it to death with my youngest brother the second time around. And the monsters felt harder than they did versus the release. I think a lot of that has to do with equipment that they didn't give you in the beta. They gave you some very basic stuff, and you fought whatever was available. And so, yeah, it kind of stretched it out, made it feel harder than it does currently. I mean, I even beat Arkveld. Let me rephrase that. My brother and I beat Arkveld, and we had to capture him with less than a minute. I think one time we captured him 2 or 3 times. We had 6 seconds left, and we managed to capture him. Let's take the next monster into account, the Congalala. And yes, it did just use a fart as an attack. It also burps. We actually found it really hilarious. Not because of the farting thing, but because of some of the mechanics they introduce. Turns out its butthole is a bit of a weak spot you can exploit when it does that. So yeah, the Japanese are kind of weird. I mean, to be honest, this is going to be the only enemy that you're going to encounter that I've seen that does this. So if that grosses you out, you can just avoid it. Anyways, I've never encountered this. I don't know if it's been in previous Monster Hunters. I've only done Wilds and I did Rise. Never encountered it. I was easily, without knowing what its attack pattern is, what its moves are, or anything like that, to just absolutely thrash it with some of the most basic gear. Outside of, I think, my belt, I was still wearing starter level leather armor, and maybe the daggers were something I enhanced or made better versions of. I can't quite remember. No, they were paralysis daggers. That's what I made. But I absolutely thrashed the living hell out of these monsters without trying. Only a couple of them managed to even knock me out once. Otherwise, I've never ever failed a mission at this point in time. It's just extremely easy. And I've been playing up to 3 stars, and it's still pretty easy. I suspect they're going to add higher ranks and then master ranks later. I hope that they're in the game. Well, maybe the master ranks they might introduce via DLC like they did for the Monster Hunter Wilds DLC. But that would just be scummy if they hid the higher difficulties behind a paywall, which kind of wouldn't surprise me, but I'm hoping they don't do that. But yes, for the most part, it's been pretty simple. I mean, yeah, I recently have been playing Monster Hunter Wilds with my youngest brother. The mechanics aren't quite the same as they are in that game. They're very similar, and when they did the beta, they had a change for a couple of weapons, like the insect glaive didn't allow you to just perpetually stay in midair. They actually had to add that back in for the official release of the game due to feedback from players. So at least they're listening in that regards. And I actually didn't complain about it, but somebody did, because I used the insect glaive, and yeah, I was actually very thankful that they added that back in. I hope it gets harder. I'm nearly at the end of the story, or I guess the segment of the story. Assuming it does something similar to Monster Hunter Wilds and Monster Hunter Rise, yeah, you think you're done, but you really aren't, and they'll increase the difficulty of the monsters. I'm hoping that's what's going to happen. We'll have to see if it's a bit more of a challenge at that point. So in terms of its combat, yeah, it still has actually some surprising depth to it where you actually have to get timing right as well as holding the button down and letting it go at certain points. Or you can do a struggle block. I can't remember what it's called because I usually don't use shields, but my youngest brother does. And he blocks them all the time. And if you get the timing right, you can do a struggle while someone else just wails on it from behind. Right now you see me using the daggers, but I also like using the insect glaive, and I'm constantly mounting them as well, so there's that. Now, in terms of combat, they added a little bit of a new gimmick, similar to what they did in Rise. What I mean by that is they took Monster Hunter Wilds gameplay and then they added something to it. Like in Monster Hunter Rise, they added what were they, silkworms? No, whatever the flying things that allowed you to shoot out strands of silk to do special moves and mount the monsters. I can't remember, honestly. I remember Wilds more because I played it a lot more than Rise. But they also had the Palamutes in Monster Hunter Rise, and they have the Sacreds in Wilds, but I'll get to those later. In Monster Hunter Wilds, they introduced wounds, where if you hit a monster enough times in the same spot, it'll open up a wound and you can perform a special move on it, doing massive amounts of damage to the rest of it as well. So these wounds are actually pretty useful. You can use it to interrupt special moves that they are engaging in. In terms of the insect glaive, I actually use those to keep my insect essence topped off so I don't have to manually target its body parts, which can be kind of a pain in the butt depending on what enemy you're fighting. They usually result in some flashy kind of attack. Still useful, but very flashy, particularly the daggers, in my opinion, where you just spin along the length of the body, hitting any wound that's there. So, with the open wounds, I will admit it makes the game easier. Like a lot easier. I mean, it was already easy to begin with. With the wounds, it's much more noticeable how easy it is to defeat monsters. Now, I said it earlier that I haven't gotten to the high rank missions yet, but earlier this morning, my youngest brother jumped back on and we played a little bit together and we got to the high rank missions after defeating the big bad monster of the story. And yes, there's an increase in challenge, but I'm kind of wondering how much of an increase in challenge that's going to be. We took on 2 Raytheons and had 0 issues with it, really. One thing about the combat that does drive me nuts are the size of the hitboxes. Yes, I knew that was a thing in Monster Hunter when I went into this, but the fact that they haven't really addressed this in what feels like any meaningful way is a bit irritating. And in some cases more so than others. Let's play a clip for you. So that clip, as you can see, I wasn't even touched by the monster. I was above it and it was falling down. And I suppose you could say there's splash damage, but I didn't see any waves come up and hit me, so I'm very confused by that. And it happens frequently where you will be way outside of any range or textures from what you could tell of the attack, but it'll still count the attack. I mean, I can point out other clips. I have hours I'd have to comb through, but I could show where it completely and totally misses, but it still lands a hit. I mean, arc build is probably one of the worst cases with its tail. I'll be above it with the insect glaive, completely out of range. But because it's above its tail, it'll strike it out and it'll count the hit. It's just, I don't know how this is still a thing in this game. Now I want to talk about the Sacreds. I call them Discount Chocobo, and I even named mine Discount Chocobo as a joke. But these things are kind of like the Palamutes from Monster Hunter Rise, where you can ride and traverse the terrain faster. These don't do combat for you, unlike the Palamutes, but you can ride around and you can collect materials without ever having to get off. There's a few things you do have to here and there, which in some ways, yes, it is kind of a nice thing. In others, it is a bit of a detraction, like never having to stop, and sometimes this damn lizard bird just doesn't want to stop. And you have to hold down the right trigger to get it to stop, and sometimes you have to nudge it a little bit to get it closer where you want, and it'll try and take off on you. But other than that, it's fine for the most part. It's really nice that they give you a holster for a second weapon. That way you can balance that out for, let's say, something with more protection, maybe a little bit slower, or something a little bit faster. Or maybe something with ranged. So that part I do like, is that second holster and being able to tell it where you want to go and it goes on its own without you having to run around all over the place. I mean, if they didn't have the Sacred and I had to control it wherever I went, I would have been fine with that too. But being able to tell where it is allows you to free up some time to look at other things like your equipment, make decisions, or grab things along the way. That way you don't have to constantly off and on the mount in order just to get some basic material. I kind of get why they did that because there's a lot of stuff to pick up, and constantly getting on and off the mount would probably mean you are not going to be using the mount. It would just be quicker for you to go from one to the next on foot, unless there's a large gap in distance between the two. Now, when it comes to your Palico, they made him or her or it. I'm gonna go with him because it sounds very male. It's, speaking English. It it was fine. It was a novelty at first, but then it just got kind of annoying, actually. And I switched it back to just the feline speak with the morales and stuff like that. In terms of it aiding you, like healing you or distracting the monster, it does well enough. Although, as I progressed through the game, it seemed to not quite do as good of a job. Sometimes the healing's a bit slow, and it'll come and heal me when I've already had a high potion, or a mega potion, I should say, wasting a heal that I now have to wait for and have to use one of my own potions for in order to not die horribly. So I'm not sure why it got somewhat worse towards the higher rank levels or monsters, but it was definitely spot on when you first started the game. Maybe that's because you didn't have the equipment to not get thrashed around horribly, but I don't know. Now, in terms of story, this game just super irritated me. You rescue the kid Nata. Nata? Let's go with Nata. I should say you do. They find him at the beginning of the game, and then you join him, taking him back to his village in the Forbidden Lands. And this kid is what I would call a Kenny. And for those who don't know, it's kind of a name making fun of a Japanese trope where they'll have a annoying child. When I say annoying, that's more or less subjective. But personally, yes, this kid is annoying. Tag along with you. The Godzilla movies are kind of an example of that, where the big bad monster will be coming after the kids, and then Godzilla will come in and save the day. In this case, your character, the hunter, is Godzilla, and you're constantly having to interfere on this kid's behalf because they keep bringing him along to dangerous situations, which is just absolutely asinine to me that they constantly do this. And the worst part is, without him being there to be the artificial catalyst for you trying to find out what's up with the big bad monster, Arkveld of this game, you really actually don't need him. Just pursuing Arkveld in itself would have been enough motivation, which, yeah, it's kind of what they did in previous games. But having this kid in this game, along with actually a lot of the other people that follow you around, is just absolutely annoying. Like, I don't really like any of the characters, but I despise this kid the most. But one thing in particular when it comes to the story is they sort of lock you into it. And they will force you to walk, and they'll be like, hey, pay attention to all this nature around, which I've had footage of that on the whole entire screen playing at this moment. Yet nothing happens here. You are forced to slow down and be like, look at all this nature. And I'm like, I don't care. I've already seen this. I don't care if the environment has slightly changed or not. And I guess it's supposed to show the changes that happen with the seasons. I really don't care. I already knew this was a thing from the beta. I was like, oh, okay. But it just felt unimportant. But in this case, that's what they're doing. They're showing the difference in seasons. In other ones, it was just this annoying thing that you had to do, was look at the environment when you really just don't care. Now, if they just made them last for, I don't know, maybe 20 seconds, that would be fine. But otherwise, it's not really necessary. You hear just banter I just don't care about amongst these characters. And then there's the obligatory scenes where you have to watch them eat. I would skip it, but I don't know how much they're going to skip, and am I going to get to a point where I'm going to miss out on information, particularly for the story. In this particular scene, it actually annoyed me even more because they're acting like it was all wise and profane, and the reality was it was just like that was dumb. Which was you went and found this woman who seems to know a lot, not really explained why, it doesn't matter. And they came to the conclusion is to go back to where they came from to study the monsters that were coming out of this area. And I'm like, why didn't you just stay there and do that? This made zero sense. It was a completely and totally contrived means of getting you to a new area to see this one person. I mean, it's not even an area where you have a lot of room to explore and hunt different monsters. It's a tiny little thing. This whole thing could have been skipped by just having some common sense of, hey, let's just continue going down. I mean, yes, there was one monster they had you hunt, but that was it. And it wasn't like an area you can explore. It was this whole scripted series of events. So it was even more pointless and dumb when they could have just easily put that monster in a already existing area in the game. Another thing that sort of just keeps driving me crazy is Alma here. She's your handler. She's sort of like more of a bureaucrat where she has to authorize the hunter to slay monsters and she has to give them a reason in a game called Monster Hunter. But it just happens every time you encounter a new monster. They're like, yeah, we need a legitimate reason to kill this monster that's attacking us and clearly is going to. Like, who would set up a society where, oh, we're just gonna let this giant beast rampage until we get permission to attack it and kill it when we have the ability to do so? It's just asinine. Like, the writing for the story in general has never been, great. It's been passable, but this was just kind of bad. On top of that, the story reminds me kind of the Pokemon movie, the very first one, where Mewtwo was cloning Pokemon and making better versions of themselves. So in this, spoilers alert, they were creating monsters based off of existing ones, but they are altering them so certain things won't happen, like predation, as in them hunting down something just to eat. So that would keep them at bay from eating the humans. And it kind of reminded me of that, but it also reminds me of the Captain Bucky O'Hare comics, where it was a running joke that Captain Bucky O'Hare could not attack the Toads unless he got permission from the inhabitants of the planet, which was very bureaucratic. And that's what it reminds me of with the handler, is that you have to wait for the handler to give you permission to do anything when it doesn't make any sense to do that. Unfortunately, it's played seriously, unlike in Captain Bucky O'Hare comic book, where it was kind of a joke. Now, because of the footage, just reminded me of one thing. The other is linking up with other players. Like, I was trying to play with my youngest brother. The thing is, they repeated this from Monster Hunter World, where you had to watch a cutscene and then you could join. I don't know if that would have helped if we did a link party and then did an environmental party and did the mission together. I don't know. But we each had to watch the cutscene before we could join. And sometimes, when it came to joining, it doesn't pause the game or stop whatever's happening. I guess that's to keep people from interrupting the game in case you are with a group going to another group. But I was by myself, and I don't know why I just didn't pause the game. But if you get attacked while trying to transfer over to another person's game to help them fight or join in the fight with another monster, it will stop the transfer if you get hit. It's just absolutely dumb that they did that. And I don't know why the whole entire thing where I just, like in Monster Hunter Wild, I joined my youngest brother's session. We're in the game together. We can see each other. This one, you have to do a link party, and then you have to do an environmental link to share the same area. It just doesn't make any sense. It was done better and should have been done better in this one. And I know I'm not really giving the game any sort of justice for it. I mean, yes, the writing's bad. The hitboxes are atrocious at times, which is kind of to be expected. But honestly, I'm having a lot of fun with the game. Learning the new monsters. Most of them are new so far. Yes, there's going to be some returning ones like Ratharos and Raytheon. But I enjoy learning the move set, what weapons work, what weapons don't, and I actually went outside of my comfort zone and started to learn more weapons. Like I usually just use the insect glaive, switch axe, and the gun lance. I've actually started using the daggers, the long sword, and the bow, in addition to what I've already known. Yes, it's a little easy, and it has gotten a little bit harder with the higher ranks. That I will admit. But otherwise, yes, I'm having a lot of fun with the game, either by myself or with my youngest brother. More so with my youngest brother. Because it does increase the challenge because it increases how much health it has when there's more people. And thankfully, the gameplay is good enough to outweigh the mediocre writing in the game, as well as some of the more boring aspects that come with it, like the forced walking sequences. Now, there are some things I wish they kept from World, like having a canteen where the Palicos can serve you a meal. They don't have one, they just give you rations and call it good. And I wish the hub spaces were bigger, like in Monster Hunter World as well. I'll admit that right now. From a narrative sort of point of view, it makes sense, unlike, let's say, Monster Hunter World, where they've had multiple fleets go over there and they establish a base of operations. But in this case, the whole entire less is more thing doesn't really apply. I just wish they had the canteen. That would have been better. Now, they also have a couple of villages that you go to throughout the game, but they're really, really tiny in scale, which is something that, yes, has been around since who knows when. Let's say NES, where, yes, there's supposed to be whole entire cities and towns, but they're only populated with a handful of people. Sort of making it hard to believe that there's any number of individuals that could make up anything that would even resemble a village, let alone just a tiny little farm out in the middle of nowhere. But like I said, I played games where whole entire towns were just represented by a couple of NPCs and that's it. So I don't really have that much of a problem with it. I do kind of wish that more games would embrace it and actually make it somewhat feel like a town or a village when they do that, but it's fine. I don't expect like Assassin's Creed Unity levels of crowds. That would just be absurd. And to be honest, it really doesn't add to the fun factor for me personally. It might affect somebody else's, but otherwise I would just be like, yeah, it's fine. More people would be nice to give it a feel that it's an actual village, but otherwise I'm not gonna knock it for not having enough NPCs to make it seem like an actual village. With all that, yes, I actually find the game enjoyable. Far more so than a lot of games that I've played recently. The story is rather lacking, but then again, I'm guessing most people are here to hunt the monsters, not so much go through the story. The story was more of an afterthought. The gameplay is the key here. It's really fun. I enjoy it a lot. Yes, it's a bit easy, and I'm hoping that I'll see a bit of a increase in difficulty with the higher ranks. I mean, yes, I've already seen some, but with more monsters being added, I hope to see a rather decent increase in difficulty with that. In terms of appearance, it's not going to be a super shiny thing depending on your rig or even just on the PS5. I think it looks good. Maybe I'm just not nearly as picky as some people because I know having eye candy has been preferable over things like, let's say, frame rate. If you can get both, go for it, but otherwise, I would not download the high res textures if you want to have performance. But if you're sort of struggling as is without them, you're probably not going to want to get them. I'm fine right now. I might be able to. I don't know. I'm honestly happy with the way it looks right now to the point where I just don't care about getting the high-res textures. And let's be honest, some of the things I said, like the giant hitboxes, are across the series as a whole. It's not just this one game. So don't take that as a particularly negative for this game. That's just a design choice that's gone across the series as far as I can tell. But like I said, it's a really fun game. I would Suggest giving it a try, but it's kind of $70, so and you only get like 2 hours before you can refund it. So that's up to you if you want to give it a try on Steam and try refunding it. Anyways, I was just rambling this whole entire time. I didn't do the scripted. This is all sort of raw because I was just trying to get it down while it's still fresh in my brain or relatively fresh. So if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Have a good one.